Now to the United States, and there are no survivors from a mid-air collision between a passenger jet and a military helicopter near Washington, D.C. The two aircraft, with a total of 67 passengers and crew on board, crashed into the freezing Potomac River. Emergency crews have recovered dozens of bodies, and investigators have found the black box recorders from the crashed airliner.
CCTV footage shows the moment the two aircraft collided mid-air, plunging both the passenger jet and Army helicopter into the icy waterway that cuts through Washington, D.C. The plane was on its way to land at the Ronald Reagan National Airport when the incident occurred. The American Airlines flight had departed from Kansas with 64 people on board, including world champion figure skaters, while the U.S. Army helicopter, which was carrying 3 soldiers, was on a training mission.
We do know on our side who was involved. It was a fairly experienced crew and that was doing a required annual night evaluation. They did have night vision goggles.
Officials say no one is believed to have survived. Investigations into how the collision happened in some of the most heavily monitored airspace in the world, just a few kilometers from the U.S. Capitol, are underway.
Safety is our expectation. Everyone who flies in American skies expects that we fly safely, that when you depart an airport, you get to your destination. That didn't happen last night. And I know that President Trump, his administration, the FAA, the DOT, we will not rest until we have answers for the families and for the flying public.
While the National Transportation Safety Board is leading the ongoing probe, instead of answers, U.S. President Donald Trump delivered what he called opinions on the cause of the crash, which he could not back up. Trump also offered his condolences.
Their families, please. Today we are all heartbroken. We're all searching for answers. That icy Potomac, it was a cold night, cold water. We're all overcome with the grief for many who have so tragically perished, will no longer be with us.
Divers are working to recover the remaining bodies from the river.
Well, let's get more now from journalist Matthew Cappucci in Washington, D.C. Matthew, bring us up to date on the recovery operation.
Well, weather is definitely playing a factor right now. Water temperatures are only 2.1 degrees Celsius, so that means there's ice floating down the river at times. That's part of the reason why it was difficult for people to survive, if they did survive the initial impact. Unfortunately, we know everyone perished. But at the same time, for rescue and recovery missions ongoing right now, that's a huge impeding factor. Looking out my window right now, I'm only about 1.5 kilometers, give or take, from the scene of the accident. I can still see there are police teams and divers working in the river right now trying to extricate wreckage. But right now, it's an evolving scene. One thing I will say, last night, one of the toughest things to see from my vantage point was around 3 o'clock, 4 in the morning, when all the ambulances that were waiting there for possible victims sort of broke off and went back home and sort of just disappeared. And it was clear at that moment that it was more a recovery mission and not rescue.
There's a lot of speculation, Matthew, about what may have caused this collision. What are you hearing?
Well, we know about 1 out of every 3 airplanes last night was using runway 33. That runway crosses the Potomac. Basically, the airplanes have to kind of take a left turn at the last minute. And this airplane that had 64 people on board was cleared to land. So we know the American Airlines flight was doing everything it was supposed to do. The Black Hawk helicopter was basically told by air traffic control, wait for this plane to go by, then proceed, but confirm you have a visual. The helicopter did say, I see the aircraft, but proceeded anyway. So we think what may have happened, at least very early on, based on the information we have, is that the helicopter may have been looking at the wrong plane, lost situational awareness or depth perception, and proceeded anyway into the path of the oncoming CRJ flight.
Now, President Trump has also spoken about the crash. Tell us more about what he's been saying and how his comments have been received.
Well, historically, this president will oftentimes start off with points that are worth mentioning and then sort of inject so much conjecture, opinion, and non sequiturs that it becomes this disheveled blither of mush, and that's sort of what this press conference was. It began with him emphasizing the need for qualified people to be running air traffic control. Great. I think everybody agrees on that. He mentioned the need for a fast investigation, which also is important. You know, government bureaucracy, these things can take months, if not years. And when people need answers fast or want answers fast for closure, sometimes we do need to speed things up. And I think the public appreciates that. However, then the press conference devolved. He had claims of diversity and equity playing an issue with this. We have no idea yet. It is way too early. We don't know the race, the gender, anything about the air traffic controllers. And more importantly, we know that this likely wasn't an air traffic control issue. This may have been an incursion by the helicopter going where it wasn't supposed to go. So this, right off the bat, is just a needless distraction and conjecture. Then he tried blaming the previous administration for this issue, which is just so far of a leap, so far of a jump that Evel Knievel couldn't have made a jump like that. He furthermore tried doing these sort of imitations of the accident scene that were so basic and so realistically reminiscent of his days on reality TV that I think it's insensitive to the victims and just a distraction from the investigation that needs, by virtue of its process, to be procedural.
Matthew, thank you very much. That was journalist Matthew Cappucci in Washington, D.C.